So welcome to another Oracle Apex Office Hours session. And in this session, we will learn about data visualization in Oracle Apex 18.1. So while much of the content that I will cover today is to discuss functionality that is already available in our production release, I may touch upon topics that refer to future release. So for revenue recognition purposes, please do not make purchasing decisions based upon anything that I cover in this session. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Hilary Farrell. I'm a consulting member of technical staff with the Oracle Apex development team, and I'm based in Dublin, Ireland. I've been with Oracle since 1998. And joined the Apex team back in 2006, with my focus being on the the Access conversion utility, converting Microsoft Access applications to Oracle. But over the years, I've worked on various core features and functionality, such as charts integration, modal dialogues, RESTful services, and that's the Apex RESTful services integration with ORDS, create wizards, packaged app installations, and more recently, along with my development responsibilities, I've also had some release management responsibilities in terms of managing the nightly Hudson build, bug reviews for our patch sets and the release, and essentially preparing that deliverable that you download from OTN. So while I'm not on social media, I am an active member of our OTN forum. And if you do have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me there. So as this session is geared towards those of you who are new to Apex, I will give a brief intro to Oracle Jet Charts and its integration in Apex. And then I'll actually delve into a demo and show you how quickly and easily you can create these charts in your own applications, focusing in on a number of the declarative attributes that are available, as well as showing you how you can utilize the Jet API to customize those apps if you need to. We will then wrap things up with a Q&A session. So I would urge you to post any chart-specific questions that you have in the chat, and David will kindly moderate that Q&A session. So as I go through the demo, if anything pops up that you have a question about, please do post those questions, and we'll endeavour to respond to as many as we can in the given time. Just one important note, as this session is being recorded, please do ensure that your videos are turned off. Thank you. So we'll start with a little question, just why use charts in the first place? Well, they're actually an extremely useful tool for visually representing your data in your company. They allow your customers to visually compare data, spot trends and patterns that aren't as easily discernible when viewing information on a report, particularly when you're dealing with large volumes of data. So they can allow your organization to gain a better insight into their business and improve decision making and help transform operational data into actionable information. So in comes Jet Charts, and with Apex 5.1, we integrated Oracle Jet data visualizations as our charting solution. Jet, or JavaScript Extension Toolkit, as its name implies, is a toolkit which is made up of a number of third-party libraries such as jQuery, Require.js, Hammer.js, as well as a number of I'll just turn that off, as well as a number of Oracle-provided JavaScript libraries. And when combined, they allow you to create applications that you can build against your Oracle products, and particularly on the Oracle Cloud services. Jet itself is geared towards more advanced customers who with JavaScript skills. But with that said, as with all of our core components, they are declarative, and in Apex, you don't need to actually know JavaScript in order to utilize these charts. The solution is JavaScript based, taking a JSON object containing the data to render on your chart. It's highly customizable, Jet has a very well documented API to support their visualization components, many of which we declaratively expose in Page Designer, so you can utilize them in your charts. What's great is that they have built-in accessibility support to the WCAG 2.0 standards, providing built-in keyboard navigation support, zoom control up to 200%, and appropriate color contrasting. They also support responsive design, meaning that you can render your charts on devices that, from desktop to mobile devices, and still expect those charts to render appropriately for the given device. And they also support a very wide range of chart types, a number of which are visible on this screenshot. All of these that you see are declaratively supported in Apex. So with our 18.1 release, we integrate JET 4.2.0, and that has allowed us to basically expose the widest number of chart types that we've ever been allowed or able to support in all the releases to date. So that includes bar, line, pyramid, funnel, and probably in the range of about 26, 27 charts, giving the use of the orientation to change it from horizontal to vertical. The creation of these charts is based and can be based on a very simple source, such as a select star from EMP. For those of you that are familiar with working with our legacy AnyChart solution, you will know that the SQL needed to be provided in a specific syntax, and that restriction essentially is listed with our JET support. The colors are also integrated with our universal theme, which makes it very easy to modify the colors to use within your own organization, and I'll demonstrate that later. They've also got built-in translations, which is very handy if you switch the language of your application, and you'll see that reflected in the tooltips, as well as in months that will be displayed on date time information on your chart. With 5.1, we introduced built-in document direction support, and what's great with the JET charts is that based on that application level document direction support, to render your chart or your application content right to left when it's using universal theme, JET charts will respect that automatically and render the chart accordingly. We ship with a sample charts application that is installed or can be installed via the packaged apps tab in your workspace, and is also hosted on apex.oracle.com. We will provide the link later on in this session. And it includes an example of all of the chart types that we support, as well as many of the declarative components, just to demonstrate how easily you can utilize them. Our reporting solutions, such as interactive reports, interactive grid, as well as web sheets, all support the rendering of JET charts as well. And if you do have existing AnyChart charts, we do have an upgrade, an automatic upgrade option via the upgrade application wizard, or indeed in Page Designer, simply change the chart type to convert your chart over to JET. One notable exception is if your chart is based on custom XML. In that instance, what you would need to do is take a copy of the custom XML, which you've obviously used for a specific reason to add functionality that we didn't declaratively support, switch the chart not to use custom XML, and then convert it to JET. And at that point, you may actually find that the customizations that you made in XML are declaratively supported in JET. So let's get down to the actual demo. And for this, I'm just going to use a small sample application that I've put together. And it's got a couple of declarative support options, as well as customizations using the JET API. But firstly, what I'd like to do is just show you how to create one in your own app. We'll run the Create Page wizard and select Chart. And here you see the various chart types that are supported. One exception on this page is the map chart, and That is the exception in that it is a legacy AnyChart-based solution, which is Flash-based. All of the other chart types you see available here are JET solutions. In a future release, we do hope to offer a JavaScript-based alternative. So we'll go with the default, give our page a name. We'll add it to our navigation menu bar to make it easy to navigate to. And at this point, I can select a table or query to base my chart on. And I'm going to choose a table that ships with the sample charts application. Then on the next step, I make my column mappings. And what we're doing here is choosing the columns that we wish to be used for rendering the information on your chart. So for a bar chart, I need to render a label, which will appear on the x-axis. I'm going to use the employee name. And the value will appear on the y-axis. And I'm going to choose the salary. And a couple of things to note here. For 18.1, we've added this new value aggregation option. And that allows you to declaratively define an aggregation based on the value column that you've selected. But I won't demo that right now. I will cover that later on. The other thing to note is if you choose a different chart type, for example, range, you will actually see different column mappings displayed on this page because different charts require different values. And for range, for example, you need to define a low and a high numeric value, and you would be asked to select those here. So let's create that page. And here we're in Page Designer. And I just want to give you a quick overview of working with the component and how to navigate around the various attributes. So the first level is the region level. And at this level, you set your generic region settings, such as the layout or the template that you wish to use. One to note will be the static ID. So if you do intend on using custom JavaScript for your chart, you would define a static ID, for example, bar chart, and then that would be referenced in any JavaScript that you would utilize for this region. You can also define the chart source at this point as well. Next is the attributes. As I generally refer to as the chart level attributes. And at this level, you have the option to select the various appearance options associated with the chart. So if it's to be displayed horizontally or stacked, also if you want animation applied to the chart when it's rendered or when data changes, excuse me, or if indeed you want a tooltip displayed or legend. And this is also the point where you would enter any custom JavaScript code that is specifically referencing the JET API, which I will refer to later. Next, we have the series level. And this is the source, essentially, of your chart. You must have at least one series defined for your chart. Some chart types support multiple series. Others, such as a stock, only support a single series. And here you'll see the source definitions that I defined in the Create Page Wizard. One thing to note with the location, it's set to local database, meaning that it's referring to a table that resides within the schema associated with the workspace that I'm working on. But if I were to define my query at region level, which I mentioned just a short time ago, then I would set this location to region source, and I would proceed with defining my mappings as I have done already. Defining it at region source is very helpful if you're dealing with a multi-series query. So here I have my column mappings as I've defined, including a number of additional attributes that you won't see in the Create Page Wizard. You get a subset, essentially, when you're working with the Create Page Wizard. And finally, we have the axes. This will only be visible for chart types that actually support axes, such as bar or line. You won't see this for pie or donut, for example. And this is the main point when you want to format the data on your chart. For example, you want to set a numeric formatting or indeed a date. Or you may also want to control various other attributes of the axis, whether it has a title and what information is visible on that. So let's take a look at the actual chart that was rendered. And here we have the chart with the x-axis displaying the employee names and the y-axis displaying the salary ranges based upon the data. You can also see in the tooltips, it's by default rendering 3 pieces of information: the series name, the group or the label, and the value. So the first thing we can do here is apply some formatting, because by default you're seeing that K used in the formatting. So let's do a quick edit of this chart and go to the y-axis. And it's the format type attribute here that we need to use. So we have a number of options available in the select list. The 3 at the bottom are the ones that refer to numeric information. And in this particular case, I want to apply a currency format. I don't want any decimal places applied, and I want it to be displayed with the US dollar. So let me just save that. Run my chart again. And now I see my nice formatting applied. I see the value with the dollar sign as well. But what would be more ideal is if, for those of you, example, who do not use dollars, and you may be running your application in a different language, I'll go to the shared components of this app. If I changed it to German, for example, what I would expect to see is the symbol change to euro. And how easily you can do that now in 18.1 is you do not have to define the actual currency setting here. Remove that, and we will automatically pick up the NLS Lang setting. So you now see your euro symbol, and it's much easier than, and it will change obviously depending on the language that you change for your app. Just for demo purposes, I'll just switch that back to English for myself. My German is not that good. So let's add another series on this page. And to do that, I right-click on the series node. I get my new series over in the property editor on the right, to which I need to define my source. Again, I mentioned the local source, but there are 2 other options that are new in 18.1. The first is a remote database, and that would be referencing a remote database connection that you have defined to a remote Oracle database over ORDS, which would allow you to render a chart based on data that's contained in that remote database table that you select in this section. Alternatively, you could also define a web source at your component level, and that could be referencing a REST endpoint, such as an open data API that you wish to render a chart on. I'm going to stick with the local for this, and I'm going to use the same chart or the same table that I used for my first series. But in this, again, I will select the label, but I want to select the commission this time. And to make it much easier to work with the chart, let's, at attribute level, make the legend visible. And here, if you haven't used this option before, the hide and show behavior is a really handy setting that provides your end users with the ability to hide and show series based upon selecting the legend item. And setting it to rescale means that the chart will change accordingly when you deselect, for example, and you see it rescale there, as it has done on the y-axis. Nice little feature that you can take advantage of. Now, to make this chart a little bit more readable, let's add a Y2 axis on the right-hand side. And this is done at series level. So I'm going to choose the series that I want the Y2 axis to be associated with. Let's filter on Y2, and I simply set assigned to Y2 to yes. Then here in my axes, you now see a new Y2 node. And this is where you can start setting your formatting for that particular axis on the chart. It may be different, and it may be specific to, it might be percentage or it might be decimal, but in this particular case, because I am still dealing with currency, I'll set it to that. And when the chart is refreshed, you see that displayed on the right-hand side. What we could also do, which would be useful, is to apply a link. So when I click on one of the elements of this chart, I can redirect to a report, for example. So I have a report that I've predefined. And this is simply an interactive report based on the very same table that I'm using for my charts. And what I'd like to do is, when I click on an element of the chart, I want this report filtered on that selection. So let's try that. I'll go this way. Here we go. And this is at series level. Again, filter on link. I wanted to find to redirect to a page in this application. And I know it's page 31. And because it's an interactive report and it's a filter that I want to set, I'm using interactive report URL syntax here to specify it is the EMP-NO column of that report that I wish to be used in the filter. And here I'm selecting the column of my chart query, and it's that value that will be used to set the filter on page 31. Okay, so if I run my chart now, I click on forward, I expect my interactive report to be filtered on that selection, which it has been. Something that I've seen asked a couple of times in the forum is people's questions about how to define a custom tooltip on their chart. So as you see by default, you can see 3 values that are displayed: the series, group, and value. If we go to attributes level and filter on tooltip, you can see here that you can switch those values on and off as you choose. So if, for example, I chose to switch off the group, that would no longer be visible for either series. However, if you want to get a little bit more detailed and you may want to reference a completely separate column, what we can do here is handle that via SQL. So you'll see I've defined this series on a table, but I can simply switch that to SQL, which automatically renders the SQL query for me. I'm just going to add my custom tooltip that I wish to be applied. And this is the column alias, my tooltip. So I've added that to my query. And then under my column mappings, I set custom tooltip to that value. You will notice that there are a couple of other tooltip options here as well. The legend tooltip will allow you to select what value you want to be displayed when a user hovers over attributes of the legend. And similarly, the label tooltip, when a customer hovers over values of the x-axis, that value will be displayed. So here you can see the job selected. Very easy, and you can customize that as you wish. I do have, I guess, more complex examples included on my own sample charts app, which we will link to a little bit later. So let's take a look at the color option. On this page, which may look familiar if you have used the Sample Charts app, I'm demonstrating the 4 possible ways that you can change the colors. The first of which is using Theme Roller. So I'll launch Theme Roller. I'll just move it a little bit closer here so you can actually see. Select Show All, and down under Palette, you can see that the colors that are used for the 2 series of the chart refer to color 1 and color 4. This is a customized style that I am using in this particular app, but with Universal Theme by default, the colors that are defined in the palette tend to be quite close to each other, and to ensure that each series of the chart is easily distinguishable from another, we don't simply choose the colors in order of a sequence, as in color 1, 2, 3. We tend to skip a few to ensure that each one has a very different color associated with it, which is why you see color 1 is used here and color 4. So what I could easily do is change this. Let's go red. And once I've selected the color, and again, I'm getting my little tick there to say the color contrast is acceptable and okay. I save that setting. And when I close Theme Roller, you'll see the colors have been applied to my chart. So this is a very easy way to control the color scheme across your application. Those changes don't just apply to your chart, they will be across the app, so that's important to keep in mind. The second option here is defined simply at series level, declaratively. So if I take a look at the series of this chart, you'll see I have a color defined there, which I can very easily choose using this color picker, or indeed just type in myself. Another attribute I just want to highlight here, again, I've seen this asked a couple of times in the forum, is the ability to change the font and color of the labels that are actually rendered on the elements of the chart. And this is simply using the value that is included in the item level help. So I would recommend having this region always open when you're going through the attributes to familiarize yourself with the options. And as you see here, the color has changed and the labels are displayed in white in that font. Another option, and one which will be very helpful if you're dealing with a single series chart but want each bar to be rendered with a different color, or indeed you simply want to have control over displaying the bars in a different color depending on a specific value. Well, that can be done by the SQL. I'm just using a little case statement in this particular example. And in this case statement, I am basing the setting of the color on the quantity that is being returned in my data set. And I'm giving it a column alias called my colors. And then let's filter on color again. And here we can use the substitution syntax to reference that. And when I rerun my chart, I see those colors applied. Another example we have here on the end is using custom JavaScript, which, if not necessary, you do not need to go down this route, but if you do want more control, then take a look at the JavaScript initialization code attribute. This is where you can utilize the Jet API to make customizations, some of which is because we may not have that attribute declaratively exposed in Page Designer. Here in the help, you will see that we have a demo function that you can use. And in that function, to explain, there's an options object, and that contains essentially all of the attributes that have been defined declaratively via Page Designer. as well as the data for your chart. And we will use the content of that in the rendering of the jet chart. So if you wish to customize the data portion, then you need to define a data filter callback function. And within that function, and this section here, you can do as you wish to manipulate the data. In this particular example, I am manipulating the series array, which there's only one series, so I'm just referencing the first element of that array. And that series array contains an array of 5 bars. So it's the 5 bars in your chart. And for each of those, I reference the color. And just to tie that in with the actual API, here is we're in the JET API guide, and you can see that the series is indeed an array which contains items, which itself is an array, and then the color is the attribute which takes a string. I then return that data, and at the point of initializing this chart, we will execute your function and apply those changes to the rendered chart. So that's the color options. Let's take a look at the time axis type option. So on this line chart, I am rendering date time information on the x-axis, but as you can see, it's not in a very helpful format. And again, I have seen this question come up from some customers, and to explain why that is occurring like that, we'll edit the chart and take a look at the attributes and the time axis type setting. JET requires that this attribute is enabled when you're dealing with date time information on the x-axis. You should choose, depending on your own data set, which attribute makes sense for you. If, for example, you need to skip gaps, or indeed you're dealing with mixed frequency in terms of times in the daytime information. So let's enable that, but let's also apply a format. And this is going back to the x-axis and choosing that format type attribute again. But in this case, we now have a number of options available to us here. And all of these declarative options tie in with JET-specific formats that they support. So you could choose one of those if you wish. And I've chosen the date medium. And in the help, you can see what that format will look like. However, another alternative is you can utilize the pattern to define your own format, keeping in mind that this isn't an Oracle data format, it is Unicode CLDR. So you can find that online to get the specific formatting that can be used, and there are a couple of examples also included in the help. And if I save that and run the chart, now you'll see that the dates on the end are rendered in the format that I've specified. Just a couple of other things to highlight in this example. You may have noticed that I'm using zooming because I'm dealing with the larger volume of data. It can make it much easier to zoom into the content. And as I navigate across the line, you'll see the tooltip is displaying the different points. And how that is achieved is through the setting of a data cursor. So I'll just show you how you can get the two of those attributes. The first is, both of which are at the attributes point, data cursor. Set this to yes, and then in the behavior you can choose what type of behavior you like. I've chosen smooth, meaning that when I move the mouse over the line, the tooltip is changing very smoothly, but you could go for the snap option if you prefer that. And the zoom option, which I also demonstrated, again, very helpful when dealing with large volumes of data. I'm using the delayed option, which is actually the JET recommended setting when dealing with larger volumes of data, meaning, as the help text implies, the change in the data display will wait until your zoom and scroll action has completed, which is more performant when dealing with larger volumes of data. Let's take a quick look at the series type. So in this particular case, I've got what essentially looks like a bar chart, but is in fact a combination chart. If I do a quick edit and take a look at the attributes, here you'll see that the chart type in the property editor on the right is set to combination. And there you see all the various chart types that are available. And then if I select the series, you'll see that there's actually a type attribute that's displayed. This isn't available for all chart types. Only certain chart types support rendering a mix of series on it. And combination is one of them, and range would be another. So in this example, I could change Delhi to be rendered as an area. The next, I could be rendered as a line. And the third series, I can render as line width area. If I were to choose bar area or bar range, and the reason why I'm not in this demo is because, I'll just show you, new column mappings would appear underneath, meaning that I need to choose 2 additional values that I need in order to render a range series on my chart. This is something I referred to when I was stepping through the Create Page wizard earlier. So my query doesn't actually have the sufficient information for me to use that, and therefore I'll just stick with using the line width area, and also ensure that my value is set appropriately. And here we have a combination chart with a mixture of series types, which again can make it very easy to distinguish between the series types that you're viewing. If we take a look at a pie chart, what would be more useful in this particular example would be if you're displaying a label that makes it much easier for a user to identify or associate the slice with the relevant element of the legend. And customers in this situation would actually have to hover over the element or show and hide the element so they can identify it on the pie chart, which is not ideal. So what we could do is define some labeling there, make it more efficient, and that is at series level. And here we have the label group. We set that to show. I'll just move David out of the way there. We have a new attribute called display as, and this was introduced with our 18.1 release. And you can now declaratively select what type of label you want to find on your pie chart. With 5.1, it would have been necessary to use custom JavaScript in order to achieve this, but we believe it made more sense to expose that as a declarative attribute. So we'll display the label in the format that's defined in the help text here. And something else to also highlight, as I'd mentioned, this chart type doesn't support axes. So if you want to apply formatting to the values that are displayed on a pie, that information will be held at attribute level. And here we have format type, which I've already defined as currency. So if I save my settings, I now have much more meaningful labels that are rendered, and you could choose to leave the legend as is, or indeed even hide it if needs be, but it's more usable for yourselves and your end users. Next, I'd like to take a look at the fill gaps in chart data option. So to give a little bit of a background here, with our 5.1 release, we introduced the Jet chart support, and Jet charts requires that when dealing with a multi-series query, each series of that query, or each series of that chart, must contain a data point for each label that's rendered on the x-axis. So, for example, let's delve into the analyst here. JET would expect 3 data points in the JSON that's being used to render this chart. However, by default, if I were to use this SQL query highlighted on the right, which is what is used for this chart, the resulting JSON would look similar to the following. And if we take a look at the analyst, there is actually only one data point. So how JET renders that is that it simply emits it in the first position on the chart against the first label, which in this case is incorrect. We expect the analyst to be in department 20, but they're appearing in department 10. If you wish to address that pre-513, you would have needed to create a query, something similar to the following, using a left outer join. Post 513 and following customer feedback, we did actually add automatic handling to inject those missing data points in your JSON object. And as this was a patch release, we couldn't expose any options through the UI because we couldn't make any UI changes. So by default, with a multi-series query, we would carry out the densification and order the data by label ascending. So in this case, you can see that the order by statement in my query is actually being ignored, and that is intentional to ensure that we were injecting the null or missing data points in the correct location of the JSON object. However, a number of customers would prefer to have more control and have their order by respected. So to address that in 18.1, we've added a new attribute called fill gaps in chart data. And that is at attribute level. And by default, it is set to yes with label ascending, meaning it's backward compatible for those charts that were created pre-18.1. You can, of course, change the sort order if you wish. And now when I run that page, you'll see that the sort order is actually respected. Something to keep in mind is if I change this option to no and save that, as you can see, the sort order is gone. That is intentional because we now respect the sort order that has been included in your query. Just note that you are back in the situation that you could have been in 513, in that you need to ensure that the SQL query you're using renders the sufficient data points, essentially handling the densification to ensure you are rendering an analyst data point for departments 30, 20, and 10. And if we take a look at that query could be something like this. And you're getting everything in the correct order. And your order by is respected. With a single series query, the fill gaps in chart data is ignored, and we will always respect your order by statement. And here it's done by quantity ascending, which you can see is the case. In the area of report charting, which I mentioned during the intro slides, you can create JET charts for views on your interactive report and your interactive grid. And that they can be created via the action chart option, where you'll be presented for the interactive report a subset of the chart types as well as a subset of the attributes. As it is just another view of what is essentially a reporting component, we don't expose all of the attributes here. It would lead to a very cluttered UI if we were to do so. Similarly with the interactive grid, and here is the grid view, you do also have the same ability via the actions menu to define a chart. With this new marquee feature introduced in 5.1, we did expose a number of additional chart types. And again, a few additional attributes there. Currently, we do not have any plans to extend this to offer anywhere near the number of attributes that you would see available for a report region or for a chart region. So what we would say is, if you need more granular control over the charts that are rendered, define a chart region. And then similarly with WebSheet, the sections that can be defined in here offer similar options to what you will see with an interactive report and render a jet chart with the mappings very similar to what you'll see in Page Designer. So we also have a couple of customization options here, which I'll just quickly highlight before jumping into the Q&A session. You might want to give your end users a little bit more control over the chart that they're viewing. For example, if you want them to be able to change the orientation, which I'm doing using the buttons on the right, or indeed even the chart type. And how that's done is through the use of a dynamic action and referencing, in this particular case, the OJ chart API type attribute. If we edit that chart, I have a number of buttons that have been created on the region. And when that button is clicked, it is executing a dynamic action on the click event. And it is executing a JavaScript code snippet. What is important to note, and this is going back to the region level of the chart, is that a static ID has been defined. And you'll see that is my chart. And if I then look at the JavaScript code that is executed, I am referencing that static ID using the region interface. So this syntax is new with 18.1 because the chart region is registered with the region interface. And I am stating that I'm calling the jet option method, and I wish to set its type attribute to the value of bar. And if we take a look at the jet API again, here is my type attribute. And it's important, it's that property that you're referring to when you're making customizations. And all of the support values are listed here. So that's how easily I can add that customization as a JavaScript snippet for dynamic action to fire. Another example you may wish to do is, if you want to tweak the actual chart that's rendered, and this isn't something that your end user controls, I just want to include a new attribute that isn't available declaratively. Well, that can be used through a small little JavaScript snippet like this. If I edit my chart, and just to explain what it is adding, let me come out of that, is this stack label number that's displayed on top of each stack. I edit the chart, go to the attributes section and review the JavaScript initialization code. And here I'm simply adding the stack label attribute to my existing options object and setting it to the value of on. Similarly, referencing the information from the Jet API. And to take it one step further, and I won't delve into too much detail on this, if there were components that we don't yet declaratively support, you could add them as plugins into your own application. One example of which is the OJ Legend plugin, and this is included in the sample charts application as a demo. And it's a separate component within the Jet suite. Or indeed, you could take a look at apex.world, and there's a couple of customer-provided plugins, such as Rull Hartman's PictoChart plugin, if you wanted to integrate that into your application. Again, it's something that's not currently available declaratively, but very easy to incorporate into your app. So I've included on the slides a couple of additional resources links, the first of which is the link to our hosted sample charts application. That includes numerous examples, and I highly recommend installing that into your workspace, or indeed refer to this hosted version. I also have my own sample application, and this is my primary location for responding to customer questions on the OTN forum, where I provide examples. And you'll find examples going back years on not only JET, but AnyChart examples as well. And a link to our OTN forum as well. In terms of JET, there's the link to the main JET site, but the one I want to highlight is the OJChart API. And I want to highlight the URL. Ensure that if you are making any customizations, that you are referencing the appropriate API to correspond with the version of JET that we incorporate in Apex, which is currently 4.2.0. The JET team are working on a much faster release schedule than we are, and actually released 5.2.0 just 2 days ago. So with that, they have updated their website. So just ensure that you are referencing the correct API when making changes. And now we can go to some of the questions that may have come through on the chat. But just before delving into the ones from David, we did have a couple that were posted prior to the session, one of which had multiple parts, so I just want to cover that in separate responses. The first is, what is the architectural reason for such a difference between charts in interactive report, interactive grid, and chart regions? Is there any plan to make it more standardized? So yes, those charting solutions are very different. While all generate a JET chart, the chart types and the available attributes are quite different. It is intentional. If you are creating a chart region, it gives you a granular control over the chart type that you're rendering and access to a wide range of attributes exposed in Page Designer. Whereas with interactive report and interactive grid, you're essentially dealing with reporting components, and those reporting components can be rendered using different views, such as a single row view or an icon view, or indeed a chart view. But as it is primarily a reporting component, it's only a small subset that we've chosen to expose there. And if you want more control, it would need to be via a chart region. Next question is it possible that we get motion charts in Apex? And that, for those who may not be familiar, a motion chart would be similar to a dynamic bubble chart, allowing you to track data changes over a given time frame. And Oracle JET doesn't support motion charts, and I don't believe they have any plans to do so in foreseeable future. The customer did provide a link to a D3 chart in this particular case, and your option here would be, or could be, to use that D3 chart and create your own plugin in Apex, so then you can integrate it into your Apex app. And finally, what about integration of Oracle Data Visualization Desktop into Apex? The short answer is no. In a little bit more detail, that product is a personal standalone desktop tool that's part of the Fusion middleware suite, and it supports rendering or generating SVG-based charts. Our charting solution is and will be for the foreseeable future based on Oracle JET data visualizations. We're really happy with the charts that we've integrated, and we've gotten very positive feedback from our customers. So that will be our direction for the foreseeable future. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Hilary. So the first question I've got is actually one that I've had problems with as well, where I created a chart and there's all these group 50, group 51, group 52 things coming out on my x-axis. So why do they come out? How do I get rid of them?
Okay, so the reason why you're getting labels like that is because your data contains duplicate labels. JET only supports rendering labels on the x-axis that aren't duplicate. Once it hits a duplicate occurrence, then you'll see that starting to be rendered with a group and then a number after it. So how you get rid of that is essentially via the query. You'd need to omit those occurrences from the query result set, or modify the query to ensure that you are rendering a unique label for each data point that's going to be rendered on the chart.
Excellent.
No worries. And I do have that as a point on my FAQ page in my own sample app.
Okay. And in fact, can you just stop sharing so we can see your face better? I've got another question here on downloading charts. And, you know, can you download charts from a standard chart region?
So Jet charts don't support the download functionality that would have been available with the AnyChart solution. And I don't believe it's on their radar anytime soon. So unfortunately, that wouldn't be an option.
Okay. What about from an interactive report or interactive grid?
To download the chart data?
Yes.
The download would be in the CSV or HTML format, but it wouldn't be as a chart format.
Okay, great. Next question was about the differences between Jet charts and Apex charts. I'm putting this more generically. The charts available in Apex doesn't include all of the Jet charts. Why have we selected these charts, and what about if you want to use one of the other charts?
Sure. So the reason for selecting the suite of charts that we declared to support currently was to ensure that at a minimum we had a solution or an option available for those moving from AnyChart over. We went for the most commonly utilized chart types, and in assessing a couple of the other Jet chart solutions such as Sunburst and the NBox, they're not quite commonly so commonly used as something like a bar or a line. So we chose not to include that declaratory because we didn't believe it would be as popular. With that said, with each of our releases since 5.1 has gone out, we have introduced new charting solutions. So while we don't currently declaratively support all of them, it doesn't mean we won't offer it in a future version.
Okay, so the one of the things is if there's one that you really like, then you know,
create a plugin.
Create a plugin is a very good way to do that. Excellent. Another question that came up is, are the charts responsive? So if I'm displaying it on a small display, you know, what happens to the charts if I hide and show the toolbar, for example?
Yes, they are indeed. That was one of the, I guess, the core features of Jet in general for us moving to that solution. So if you're on your mobile phone, you will see it rendered accordingly, and it will just adjust accordingly, even if you're on desktop and you minimize the browser size. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we've had a few questions come in on heat maps, and putting in a vote for they want that supported in a future release, and we will take that into consideration.
Absolutely, we will. Yep.
I think that basically covers the majority of questions that have come in. And I thank you very much for your time, Hilary. Great presentation. Hopefully people know a lot more about charts and how to utilize them to the best of their advantage.
Hopefully. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.